So today is Jamaica's Day of Independence, and as someone who identifies as a Jamaican critic, I feel like it's a crime that I haven't done a review for Harder They Come yet. One of my favorite movies, the #1 movie in Jamaican history. If you haven't seen The Harder They Come, what are you doing with your life? Stop watching this, go watch that movie, and then come back and watch the rest. Or if you want to hear me talk about it first, that's fine, because I love the hell out of Harder They Come. I think this is a great movie that still stands the test of time, even though it came out almost 50 years ago, which is crazy to think about, considering that there haven't been that many films that came from Jamaica since then. And I don't think there's been one that has touched Harder They Come. Not to say that there haven't been great Jamaican films. A lot of them have been great. But I still think in terms of story complexity, music, dialogue, nothing comes close to The Harder They Come. And it's funny because a lot of the stuff that's touched on in this movie gets touched on in those other films as well. There's a common thread in Jamaican films that has the presence of violence in the society. So much so that Jamaican film has been criticized for almost glorifying violence. And Harder They Come is a movie about what happens to a society that is bred to glorify violence. Harder They Come is a story about a guy who wants to do his best with his talents and is forced into a life of crime and violence because that was the only thing that gained him any recognition.
Whatever happened, the guy Ivan is a boss.
You find a record yet, man?
Well, it was put back here a long time ago, you know, sir.
Find the record, find it!
Send this one to the editor. Make sure him get it.
All right.
Backside.
But you can't expect me not to publish a picture like this.
You want to hear that song again? Hey, you know something? All the other jocks been getting this call all day for this big bad song about the runaway guy.
Starts out, you see young Ivanhoe Martin carrying a mango for his mother from country all the way to the city of Kingston. You get a sense of who Ivan is before all the bad stuff starts happening to him. He's waving at people out the window, he's smiling, he feels like he's going into where the streets are paved with gold, and the first thing that happens to him when he gets there is he gets robbed.
Hey, come back here, man! Promote things, man! Come back here, man!
I mean, really and truly, Ivan is just, he just don't know any better. He's naive. He's a babe in the woods and he's here in the big city. In fact, there's even a presumption that the only thing that he can do once he gets to the city is turn to crime. Ivan has big dreams of becoming a singer and making the most of his vocal ability. When he says this to his mother, all she says is,
"What kind of job you can get outside the turn criminal?"
Ivan's reaction to this is,
Why something like that?
well, to put it mildly, he gets a little bit pissed off. He resents the implication that the only thing that he can do with his life is turn to crime, and yet his own mother is the one who's saying that. Throughout the movie, you'll see Ivan try to make his way doing small jobs here and there, and eventually working his way into a recording studio. And at every step of the way, Ivan is treated like trash. He's not given a chance to prove himself, and all he's told is that he must go back to the streets, and the only language that the streets speak is violence. I love this movie because it does a lot of the things that a lot of American movies from the 70s were praised for. Straw Dogs with Dustin Hoffman and Taxi Driver with Robert De Niro. These movies that are about a man trying to do good and then the society that he's in forces him into some kind of psychotic break. There's a moment in The Harder They Come where Ivan breaks and he starts acting out violently. But you can't tell where before that moment did he make this change. There's so much nuance to Jimmy Cliff's performance. He takes everything that he's given in stride. There's not many times that he will be telling you what's going on in his head, but you can tell that he's affected by the things that are happening to him. And it's the same kind of thing that you see happening to characters like Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver, except this movie came out in 1972 and Taxi Driver came out in 1976. But guess which one is going to be on the all-time 100 lists and has 100 reviews of it on YouTube. Not that many people talk about Harder They Come, even though it was doing things that were considered revolutionary. Harder They Come is literally the definition of ahead of its time. In fact, even the ending, which I don't want to spoil here, the ending might be one of my favorite endings in cinema history. It's a subversive and clever script that almost makes the audience feel regretful for enjoying the story. There are so many quotable lines in the movie.
Every game I play, I lose.
Oh, you have gone. I didn't have on a pants. So real.
Do you think Hero can dance to the last reel?
There's so much in this movie that is stuck in my head years after watching it for the first time. Now, that's not to say that this movie doesn't have problems. This is a movie that came out in 1972 and it has a noticeably low budget. There are scenes where you can't really see what's going on because it's so dark, and there's one scene in particular. Ivan has a fight scene with somebody and you can't expect him to be like John Wick. There's not going to be that hand-to-hand combat, fast-paced kind of thing. There's even a part where Ivan's opponent has a glass bottle pointed at him, and in the movie you see him holding the bottle steady, waiting for Ivan to kick it. He's like Charlie Brown running to kick the football, but he actually gets to kick it. And even with moments like that that could kind of take you out of the movie, still manages to be effective. The director of the movie, Perry Hensel, said that he was aiming for realism with the film, and that's obvious in certain scenes. But there are other scenes in which he applies some very surreal direction. The editing can be very choppy, but almost in a stream of consciousness kind of way. The movie is like a classic story of an artist chasing after his truth, but then having his truth be corrupted by the society that he's in. Ivan starts out with songs about going after his dream, getting a piece of what he's owed, and when he gets a chance to do that, he doesn't even get a fraction of a piece.
$20, sir? That don't sound right.
And because you've been with Ivan this entire time, you start to be on his side a little bit. Even when he's doing terrible things like killing people and cutting up people's faces, when you start thinking about everything that he's been through up until this point, you're kind of with him. Having the door shut in his face when he's been nothing but polite. Having his great song be kept off the radio because the guy who produces it doesn't want to make him feel too big. Like, Ivan deserves a lot based on his talent alone, and then he's not given that. There's even a scene in the movie where Ivan is talking about how much he's willing to go to work. He asks 3 or 4 times if he can do this, if he can trim the hedges, if he can wash the car, if he can do any kind of thing. When every single thing that he offers to do gets shot down, the last thing he says is, "Can I just get some money?" Of course, the response is,
"What's the matter with you young, healthy boys? All you know to do is beg, beg, beg. That's all you can do, just beg?"
That, by the way, was Beverly Manley, just FYI.
Who left the gate open?
And I think what Harder They Come does the best is that it makes you empathize with people who turn to violence and doesn't paint them in a broad brush. You get to see a lot of the criminal element in the country and seeing the inner workings of that system. You start to understand why these people do what they do, and you don't think of them in the way that the media or the police portray them. You see them as human beings who are just doing their best. People who have families who count on them.
My belly empty, my baby belly empty too.
People who have lives that they want to live properly but are kept out of the things that will help them to get to a better life. And on top of all of that, it gives you an amazing soundtrack. Just one of the best soundtracks of all time. That sounds like hyperbole. It has some classic songs. You Can Get It If You Really Want, Sitting in Limbo, Harder They Come, and Many Rivers to Cross. Classic after classic. You also have Johnny Too Bad, Pressure Drop, so many classic songs that stand the test of time. And it's not just that these songs are great. The album actually chronicles Ivan's journey throughout the movie. Starts out all optimistic, You Can Get It If You Really Want, and then it goes to Draw Your Brakes. Then you got Many Rivers to Cross because he's got a journey to go through. You know, then you got Harder They Come and Johnny Too Bad because that's when he's starting to go down the dark path and turning into a life of crime. Then you got songs like Sitting in Limbo, which chronicles one of the best scenes in the movie. It's just the song, there's no dialogue, and it's Ivan hanging out with his family. At this point, he's well on the run from the law. He's not sure what to do. Does he keep going down the criminal path, or does he try to remember who he was and try and regain a piece of his soul, right? And he's standing on the beach, and his family is off on a boat, sailing away from him, smiling and happy and waving him goodbye. And it's such a good scene. The confidence of this movie is really impressive because it just lays it out there and doesn't try too hard to sell it to you. Harder They Come still manages to be a hard-hitting, subversive, informational, and relatable drama about a guy trying to do his best in a country that simply won't let him be great. And if that's not a timeless story, I don't know what is. I really enjoyed making this review. If you haven't seen The Harder They Come, please check it out for yourself. Let me know what you thought. I'm hesitant to give this a greatest of all time, but it really is one of the greatest of all time. So I'm going to give this a GOAT. This is a greatest of all time movie. It's one of my favorites. And it's a classic. It's a classic movie. All these years later, it still hits hard. Let me know what you thought of Harder They Come if you ever get around to seeing it. If you've already seen it, which I'm hoping you have because everybody ought to have already. I mean, it's been around people. It's accessible. It's actually not as accessible as I was hoping it would be. It's not on Netflix. Couldn't find it on any of the streaming services. If people want it out there, let Netflix know. I don't know how that works, but let them know that you want to see Harder They Come on Netflix. Because I want people to be able to access it no matter what. I think it's a great film. But if you're seeing it for the first time, if you thought it held up, or if you thought it was just one of them old movies that you just couldn't relate to anymore, which I can understand. Personally, I could watch this 10 more times and I would not get bored of it. And every time I watch it, there's something new that I didn't notice the first time. If you want to see more reviews from me, you can subscribe to my channel. You can also check out my website where I have a full written review for Harder They Come and a bunch of other movies that I've been writing for years, and they're all up there. You can hit the bell icon if you want to get updated on the videos that I post. I don't know how the subscription and the bell icon works, but you're supposed to hit the bell icon to keep seeing it in your... It used to be you just subscribe to something and it was just in your feed, but now you have to do an extra step to make sure it's extra in your feed, in which case, what's the point of subscribing to it? But I don't know. I'm just putting it out on YouTube so people can see this review and hopefully find reasons to check out Harder They Come and keep it in the conversation, because that's how movies like this continue on past the decades that they've been out. It needs people talking about it, paying attention to it, and seeing it, and I think this movie deserves that kind of attention. That's my review. Thanks for watching. See you next time.